look at the damage that has been done, and I don't mean to the cities, I mean to our history, to our language, to our what was it? Sarah, play what Michelle Obama said right before Barack Obama was elected to office in '08. Listen to this.
And Barack knows that we are going to have to make sacrifices. We're going to have to change our history. We're going to have to move into a different place.
We are in a different place, Ben, and it is breathtaking on how fast it has come.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the attempt to take down not just the statues of Confederates, obviously, which is controversial, but at least understandable, moving immediately into conversations about taking down statues of Ulysses S. Grant, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Christopher Columbus is an astonishingly fast move. The attempt to shift away from rational, normal conversations about how we extirpate racism in our society. I mean, true racism, the normal belief, we actually have to define the term now because people have been misusing the term. The term racism means that you believe in the innate superiority or inferiority of somebody based on their race. This is the definition of racism. That definition has been manipulated and changed by the disintegrationists into something completely different. Now the argument made by people like Ibram Kendi and Robin DiAngelo in their best-selling books on anti-racism is that racism just means the system. That any system that has an unequal outcome by race means that the system itself is racist. So if you stand for the system, you're now perpetuating racism. So if the right to free speech ends with two racial groups in a different situation, well, that means the right to free speech is itself a racist system that must be torn down. Now, of course, the great lie there is that there is any system that levels human beings to the type where everybody ends up in an equal situation after the system is applied. I mean, even under communism, some pigs are more equal than others. But the lie there is very seductive, and the lie is very powerful. And so it's now become, the argument has now become that in order to be an anti-racist, and you see this in all the anti-racist training, which is now being put forth by major corporations, being put forth by the media, being put forth in the halls of governmental power. I mean, there are members of the federal government trained in this whole crap. The basic idea is if you don't oppose the American system, you are not, in fact, anti-racist. And that means the destruction of the American system. When folks on the political left, the hard political left, suggested that they're going to transform America, they didn't just mean that they were going to change some of the tax rates. They meant that they were going to fundamentally change how Americans thought about America, and they've been wildly successful in doing so. There was a Fox News poll that came out yesterday, and it showed that 31% of young Americans believe that the founders were villains. 31%, only 39% of young Americans under the age of 25 believed that the founders were heroes. So 61% couldn't actually just label the founders heroes. And there's also polarizations by race that have been exacerbated by the entire way that history is taught and the way that we've addressed America's problems in the past. That same poll showed that a plurality of black Americans thought the founders were villains. It was 39 to 31 thought they were villains rather than heroes, which, again, you can understand the evils of American history when it comes to race, but if you haven't taught Americans the words of Frederick Douglass, if you haven't taught Americans the words of Booker T. Washington or the words of Martin Luther King, the story of America is the fulfillment of the promissory note. The story of America is the Declaration, not John C. Calhoun's view of the Declaration of Independence, then you've done it wrong, and I think we've done it wrong.
So, Ben, I've talked to so many people recently that have come to this place to where they just feel, I think they're in mourning almost. It's if there's no chance of winning and turning the corner. How big is this battle that we're in right now? And what are the odds? And how do we turn it?
I mean, it feels almost like the final ideological battle of the United States, because what we've really come down to is a belief that the United States is something worth fighting for and upholding, and a belief that the United States is merely a vestige of evil institutions that ought to be torn down. And we had some of this battle in the 1960s, and I will remind people who are feeling despondent that it felt like in the 1960s the battle was completely lost, and then, of course, the Reagan era came out and restored a lot of that feeling. Other countries have experienced something similar. Israel, for example, experienced the post-Zionist era in the aftermath of the Oslo Accords that spanned for about 15 to 20 years, and then it turns out that their enemies didn't go away, and now the entire Israeli population is center-right. So one of the terrible facts about humanity is that America's enemies don't go away no matter how much navel-gazing we do. So, while it is true that the United States could theoretically really rip itself apart over a lot of these issues, eventually our enemies will show up at the gates. And when there's an enemy at the gates, it tends to unify Americans in a way that ideological discussions do not. I mean, I think a lot of historians have pointed out quite correctly that a lot of the fragmentation in American politics took place in the immediate aftermath of the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And then we came back together a little bit around 9/11 when there was a feeling that there was a common enemy seeking to destroy American values. And now, because it doesn't feel like there's an existential threat to the United States, we're kind of turning in again. But I think it's pretty clear that there are some fairly large existential threats on the horizon. Now, the bad news is that if it takes an existential threat on the horizon to unite Americans around the greatest set of principles ever devised by man, then we're doing something deeply wrong. But I guess the reality is that the history sort of pushes you back into a more patriotic situation, no matter how hard you wish to run away from it and declare yourself a world citizen.
Yeah, and that's not really